That right there was the opening to Fatal Fury 2. A disappointing sequel in my opinion. But if I can say one good thing about the game, it invented jiggling boobs. Okay, there are more good things to say about this game and plenty of negatives to say about this game. But no, it really did invent jiggling boobs, as you can see here. Imagine how many teenage boys back in the 90s bought this game when it came out, just for this feature. Tell me, if you were a teenage boy, would you buy a game just for this feature? Let me know in the comments. Fatal Fury 2 was developed by SNK and released in 1992, 1 year after the original, in the arcades. Not the home consoles, as home consoles didn't get this game for 2 whole years after the arcade release. But it was released for the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and the Game Boy, but only in Japan. I hear there's a lot of ports of this game for different computers and PC engines. They're only available in Japan. But for reference, I grew up with the Genesis port on the emulator thing I mentioned in my last video that I bought off Amazon back when I was like 13. But today I'm using the PC port. As a direct sequel to Fatal Fury King of Fighters and the second game in the Fatal Fury series, it brought many improvements. There were many posters, magazines, even some live action commercials advertising, as I will now show you.
100 Mega Shock Neo Geo! Ōkami たちに休息は許されないのか。伝説は繰り返す。画廊伝説2 SNK.
Now, Nintendo Power only covered the SNES version, but it did include tips and strategies for the game. Now, Fatal Fury 2 improved upon the gameplay while still being a very story-based game, with cutscenes between every fight, innovated on the 2-lane fighting system, which I covered a bit in the last video. In the first game, the 2-lane system wasn't a big deal, you just got knocked into it occasionally in certain areas. In this game, however, you can freely jump between the 2 lanes, and knock your opponents into them. It's like a fighting game in a game of Frogger had a baby. Other areas have the second lane blocked off by rampaging bulls, weird machinery, or electrical fences. There's also a much bigger roster this time. Unlike last game, which only lets you play 3 characters, Andy, Terry, and Joe, there are now 8 characters. Among new characters are Kim Kai-pwan, a South Korean Tikadu-weo master, whatever that means, who joins the tournament to promote justice and demonstrate the power of his martial arts. Then there's Big Bear, who's actually Raiden from the first game, and guess what? He's even more annoying and hard to beat in this one. It's like they took his difficulty level and said, let's crank it up to 11. Jubiya Yamada, an old man who's here to prove that age has not diminished his skills. Yeah, he just sounds like an old dude wanting to show off. Maybe he's trying to get a senior citizen discount on his tournament entry fee. Then there's Qing Shinsane, a jolly Chinese man who's extremely wealthy. His whole motivation for being here is to showcase his strength and to gain more fame. Because, you know, being rich and famous just isn't enough these days. And last but not least, Mai Shiranui. In my last review, I compared Andy to Sonic because of his speed. Well, this solidifies that comparison. Because Mai is basically Amy. She pursues Andy with a rugged, dead set, I'm gonna marry this man mindset. You gotta respect the girl, though. She knows what she wants, so she goes for it. But she ain't no sweet flower, as you can see by some of her wing quotes. And my main motivation for entering the tournament is to impress Andy, basically. Now, let's get into my favorite part of any video game. The story. The story of Fatal Fury 2 isn't much more complicated than any other fighting game, unfortunately. Which is disappointing, because the first game's story was actually pretty in-depth and pretty interesting. There's a new bad guy, Wolfgang Krauser, who's actually Geese's half-brother. Upon hearing of his brother's defeat, he decides to stage a new tournament. The tournament's name is the King of Fighters. Either Geese just didn't copyright the name of the tournament, or Krauser just said,
"No copyright law in the universe is going to stop me!"
yeah. Anyway, this new tournament takes place around the world instead of just in Southtown. In fact, I don't think a single arena actually takes place in Southtown. I've already mentioned the characters' backstories in the character section, but when you start the game, it's just them going at it in the tournament. So it's definitely not as emotional or in-depth as the first game, to be honest with you. I like the first game's story better. It had a lot more detail in the plot, and Geese was a lot more involved. Unlike Krauser, who gets like 2 cutscenes before he shows up as the final boss. And I hope you weren't expecting me to go in real depth about the story, because that's it. You beat the game, and you get 1, maybe 2 cutscenes, right below a picture of your fighter and whatever they're up to. Yeah, I thought I just wasn't beating the game at a high enough difficulty, because a lot of old games function that way, but I looked it up. No matter what difficulty you beat the game on, you just get this one character portrait with the text. To be fair, some of these are kind of funny. For example, Mai's ending when she says she's going to make Andy her disciple. I mean, look at his face. Doesn't he look so excited? Next thing I wanted to bring up is the soundtrack. Not a single tune from this game, from the first game, stuck with me. And the same is true for most of this game. Until you get to the final boss, Wolfgang Krauser. This theme is epic and truly a top-tier final boss theme. It's like Krauser hired an entire orchestra to play in his arena just so he can listen to music while he fights you. I mean, talk about setting the mood. Imagine being so confident in your fighting skills that you think, you know what this battle needs? A full symphony orchestra. Dramatic, powerful music really adds to the intensity of the fight and makes Krauser feel like a truly formidable opponent. But other than that, the soundtrack is pretty forgettable for me, honestly. Alright, let's get to the next section. Gameplay. Now we get into the gameplay. I'm just gonna let the game speak for itself right here. This is the first thing you see when you start the campaign. So that basically sums up the gameplay. You just jump between lanes, knock your opponent into the other lane, and beat the ever-loving tar out of them until they're out of health. It's a fighting game. What'd you expect? Special moves are responsive most of the time, and I can pull off most of them with relative ease. And it does come with a manual, which also shows you all the special moves, unlike the first game's manual, which only shows you one special move, and you have to see the others as you play through the game. Also, with the PC port, there are a few different modes, as with all the Fatal Fury games, such as playing the Japanese version, Carnival mode, and some high score mode. I never really bothered with these at all. And from my understanding, they're just like many games to waste your time. You can play the game in Japanese, you can shoot for a high score, or Carnival mode, which gives you 5 minutes to get the high score you can. Like I said, nothing too complicated. I didn't really bother with them, though, other than reading about them in the manual. There are 4 bosses at the end of the game, similar to how Street Fighter 2 worked. But other than Krauser, none of them really stood out to me. I mean, Billy from the first game is here, but he's just a typical fighting game boss. And I have a feeling it could have a lot more fun with it if it wasn't for one minor detail. It's hard as all get out. I mean, the first game had its difficult moments, but at least it felt fair. This game's just hard because I guess it was an arcade game and wanted to take your quarters. But heck, Fatal Fury 1 was an arcade game, and it was leagues easier and more fun than this. Now, Mortal Kombat 2 was released in 1993, a year after this. So Fatal Fury 2 might have actually inspired Mortal Kombat 2 absurd difficulty. But let's be real, both games are probably just trying to make sure you didn't leave the arcade with any spare change. I still mostly play as my main, Terry, but even on the easiest difficulty, I consistently get my teeth kicked in. Now maybe it's different for you, maybe you just played this game since you're a child, and are really good at it. And I've heard it's easier on the console versions like the Genesis and Super Nintendo. My emulator machine doesn't work anymore. The battery in it is just shot. So I can't test out the Genesis version anymore. But for me, this just isn't my style of fighting game. So let's do a quick overview, and I'll give it my score. Graphics and presentation, pretty good, still holds up today. Audio and sound, serviceable. The only musical piece that stands out to me is Krauser's theme, which is an absolute masterpiece. I mean, Krauser just hires an entire orchestra to play in his arena, just so he can listen to the epic music while he fights you. Talk about setting the mood. Better yet, I don't listen to that song so much, I'm gonna play it right now in the background. There. Gameplay. In some ways, it's a step up from the first game, having more combat options and more characters. However, it loses as points for its absurd difficulty. Story. The first game was leagues better. Now, the anime adaptation of this game, Fatal Fury 2: The New Battle, which you can find on YouTube for free, that's how I watched it, is an incredible game. Oh, sorry, incredible anime. But the game is just, it doesn't service the story at all. As much as I hate to say it, this game's actually worse than the first game, Fatal Fury 1. Fatal Fury 1 I'm most certainly going to revisit from time to time just to have fun with it. But Fatal Fury 2, I don't see myself picking it up after this review. It has some neat things to it, and probably would be a lot more fun if not for the difficulty. But it took me 3 hours to bull my head way through the main campaign for this review, okay? And we all know how fighting game stories generally go. This game's only 12 stages long. It's no longer than Street Fighter 2. And on the Super Nintendo, I can beat that game in 20 minutes. So, I'm gonna give this game a 5 out of 10. Should you play it? Well, on the Microsoft Store, it's $9.99. If you're looking for a difficult fighting game that you want to absolutely master, where split-second reactions and quick reflexes are awarded, go for it. But if you're like me, a casual fighting game player who just plays them for kicks on the occasion, this game isn't for you, at least not on a PC. Next time around, we're going to look at Fatal Fury 3, Road to the Final Victory, to end this Fatal Fury marathon. See you next time.